Hello, welcome to another important topic in management of organizations and people. We all know that the main thrust of any business organization is to make profit, but in the quest of trying to make profit, you must know that your responsibility as a manager goes beyond just serving the interest of your shareholders or stockholders. There are several other stakeholders that your decisions are likely to impact upon, right? So you're serving products and services that consumers will be buying or buyers will be buying to consume. The activities of the company is situated in a community, and there is a tendency that if there are pollution and other activities in that particular environment, the people in that particular community are likely to be impacted. You have your employees that are sacrificing. It is though they are likely to be paid, but it is important to know that their well-being and their welfare is something that as a manager you need to be interested in. Okay, so there are several stakeholders beyond shareholders or investors of the business that as a manager you need to be interested in. So it is very, very important that in our quest to make sure that our business organizations become profitable, we also operate with a sense of corporate social responsibility. So this morning's lecture is about social responsibility and ethics. It is important that we operate with ethical standards. We operate our organizations with some level of conscience. At the end of the day, it is not just about being profitable, but it's about also leaving a positive impact on the people that you claim you want to serve. So as a manager, yes, you have that, and there will be enormous pressure on you to make sure that your company is successful. But in the midst of trying to make your company successful, you ought to know that the people that you need to be serving goes beyond just those who want you to meet the financial targets, and that you need to be conscious of the concept of corporate social responsibility and ethics. Okay, so this morning, that is what I want us to learn. I want us to learn about corporate social responsibility or social responsibility and ethics, and that will be lecture 4 according to our lecture series. So briefly, let me just share the slides so that we can be on the same page. And after sharing the slides, I may minimize my video so that we can all concentrate on the slides as I go through the explanations. Yeah, so just a moment. Yes. So we'll be looking at, as I indicated earlier, we'll be looking at the concept of social responsibility and ethics. And then so we'll seek to understand the concept of corporate social responsibility, the reasons for CSR, which is the same as corporate social responsibility, the merits and demerits of corporate social responsibility, the concepts of ethics and values, the steps involved in the implementation of a code of ethics, the benefits of being an ethical organization, the way to build an ethical culture in your organization. So corporate social responsibility indicates a deliberate socially responsible behavior of an organization. It is important to understand that only complying with the legislative requirement of CSR is not enough. Organizations need to make it their deliberate choice. So there are dimensions. So CSR basically talks about a deliberate decision to go beyond just the requirements of the law and to that which will be profitable, which will be in the interest of society. Okay, so it's coming from the social means that you're thinking about the broader interests of society, the other stakeholders that are likely to be affected by the organization. All right, so you may claim that you currently paying taxes, you're complying with all the industry rules and regulations. that is okay, but that is the lower level of CSR. We have dimensions of CSR according to Carol. And as you stay with just the payment of complying with laws and regulations, yeah, you will still be socially responsible, but that is at the very bottom of the pyramid as far as corporate social responsibility is concerned. As a company, you must seek to go beyond just the compliance of legislative requirements. Okay, what the law says you should do, the taxes you have to pay, the fact that you have to pay your employees minimum wages. Yes, we all know that once you pay minimum wages, you have met the requirement of the law. But if you're a concerning and caring manager that thinks about the welfare of your employees, you get to know that, or you may realize that the minimum wage is not really something that people can work with in our economy. So CSR is about, in its practice, goes beyond just the compliance of the law. Even though if you were to comply with the law in our context as well, you'll be deemed to be socially responsible. The reason is that we have organizations in developing economies that don't even comply with the law. Currently, we're dealing with galamsey or illegal mining activities where these businesses don't care anything about the impact that they have on society. Some of them don't have licenses. Some of them have gone beyond the boundaries of their licenses, causing havoc to environment. So yes, if you were to operate in accordance with the legal requirements and regimes of a particular country, you'll be deemed to be socially responsible. But at the apex of CSR is to go beyond the requirements of the law and do something positive, something more impactful on society. Okay, CSR can also be termed as corporate citizenship, responsible business, sustainable, responsible business, or corporate social performance. So we have all of these terms that may stand for the concept of CSR, but much particularly, we have to pay attention to the concept of corporate citizenship, right? So as an organization, you are being viewed like any other citizen of a particular country. And just as we're supposed to be law-abiding, just as we have to make decisions that will promote the image of the country in which we are citizens, it is expected that as a business organization, you will also be interested in the welfare of the people that you're seeking to serve, the community within which you're operating, and all the other stakeholders that depend on your business for their survival. All right. So it's a form of corporate self-regulation integrated into a business model. All right. So you need to consciously include elements of corporate social responsibility in your business model. Most of the time, the business model is directed at making profit, as I've indicated much earlier. The focus will be how can we increase our financial, meet our financial targets and beat our financial targets. So it will take self-consciousness on the part of the management of a corporation or company to include aspects of corporate social responsibility. Okay, and it is very, very important for us to know this as up and coming, as managers or will-be managers of organizations. So there are 8 important areas of CSR that we have to pay attention to. We have the ecology and environmental quality. So we're dealing with the fiscal environment within which we are operating. So issues like pollution, I just spoke about mining. If you are into fishing, fishermen or fisher folks have a lot of concern about the type of chemicals that are being used. I hear they use mercury, and it is not healthy for that particular ecology or environment. So that is the first aspect or area of CSR. How are the activities of your organization affecting the physical, tangible environment, the land, the soil, the air, the water where you are operating? Okay, so it is important to pay attention to how your activities impact the ecology and environmental quality of wherever you are operating. So in order to reduce that, you want to watch the pollution of whatever activities that you are engaging in. Point 2 is consumerism. All right. So there is the tendency, because we want to be profitable, to just to sell any type of product in the first place, whether it's of good quality or not. We just want people to buy and consume so that we can make our money. But beyond just product, sometimes it's about deceptive advertising as well. Okay, you very well know that that product cannot serve a particular need, and yet when you listing the kind of things the product can do, you include that particular activity or that particular illness or that particular need of the consumer, just because you want to get the consumer to buy your products. So we have all kinds of advertisement making all manner of claims that in reality the product or service doesn't address that particular problem. Okay, so it is important as a manager to watch it. In our quest to cause people to want to buy more of our product, we need to be truthful. We need full disclosure. So we have examples like truth in lending. All right. Sometimes if we go to financial institutions, they know that indeed there are some clauses that if they were to make you aware of, maybe you will not go for the loan or the financial assistance that you have come for. And because of that, they will not disclose it. Okay, and that is not right. It is important to make the other party or your customers aware, full disclosure of information before they can make a decision as to whether to buy a particular product or service. Okay. Then the third major area, important area of CSR is community needs. All right. So that is what most of us are familiar with when we talk about CSR. And I think it's closer to point 8 as well. Okay, so meeting the educational and health requirements of the community within which you're operating. All right, so beyond the community, you need to be mindful of, because other people that you may seek to address. So sometimes some organizations may just target a particular kind of health conditions. Say that they want to make donations for, say, tuberculosis. They want to make some donations for HIV patients, and so on and so forth. So it is important to know your community. Within this context, your immediate environment is important, but you can also identify a peculiar case that you want to be known for, all right, and take them as the community that you want to address their need or serve their needs. Okay. Then we have government relations, very important. It falls within the domains of laws and regulations and all of that. You want to be the company that doesn't want to get into any trouble as far as complying with policies and laws of governments are concerned. So you want to have a very good relationship with governments, agencies, institutions, regulatory bodies, in order to ensure that your operations are sustained for a very long time. So it's very, very important. So in this context, we really are not talking about giving any bribe or operating illegally. We're simply saying that make sure that you become very compliant with all of the regulations and rules and policies of government of the day, so that you have a better relationship with the government. That is very, very important. Okay, because one policy, one decision of the government can probably lead to the closure of your business. So you don't want to engage in tax evasion issues. No, it can lead to a whole lot of problem for you. So it's important as part of your CSR to keep a very good government relations. All right. Point 5, or the 5th important area, is taking cognizance of minorities and disadvantaged persons. So it's similar to community needs. Basically, find out which minority group, which disadvantaged class of society will you want to address their needs. If you were to do that, that would be very, very important for you as a company. You'll be seen to be socially responsible. 6 is with labor relations, and this is very, very important, because I've seen companies that have devoted so much resources and energies in seeking to impress outside or external stakeholders. Okay, so they will come to the media showing all kinds of philanthropic activities that they are doing to some schools, some hospitals, some institutions. And yet, when it comes to their employees are treated very badly. That is not right. All right. So here, charity begins at home is very, very important. It is important that you treat your employees well. Okay, at the end of the day, is their sacrifices, their decision to work hard, their decision to commit to quality, and all that efficiency, effectiveness that will result in the productivity and the profitability of the company. So it is not really in your interest to cheat your employees and then end up showing off that you're a socially responsible company. Okay, it's important that you pay your employees fair wages and salaries. You provide them with bonuses, deserving bonuses. You give them appropriate holidays, all kinds of things that you can do to improve the welfare of your employees is something that a manager must take seriously. So maintaining good relationship with your employees and the labor force is an aspect of CSR. So CSR is not just what we see on TV, but if we were to talk to employees of your company, will they testify that the company is a caring company? Will they testify that it is a company that is willing to assist them and to help them in times of their crisis and needs? So take care of your employees, and once that is done, we can then be thinking about how to impress the external stakeholders of the organization. All right. Then we have shareholder relations. So this time around, it's about the investors, those that have invested in the business organization. They are not philanthropists. They invested with a motive to make some good returns on their money. So part of CSR is to make sure that you invest in areas that you can get good returns for these investors. In fact, if we were to study Carroll's pyramid, the first level of CSR is actually meeting the economic needs of the business organization. And what that actually means is that the business must first be financially sound before you think about the other aspects of CSR. You should have been paying your dividends or whatever returns that you have to pay to your investors before the extra may be used for CSR activities. Okay, so you cannot deny your investors or shareholders returns. You cannot keep making losses, and then on the other hand, engaging in philanthropic activities. That is not right. So part of CSR, and I dare say the most important part, is to make sure that the first and foremost, the company is profitable. Your shareholders' needs are catered in terms of paying them their due financial returns. Then we can think about how to help other stakeholders of the organization. So employees, shareholders, those things that will not come to the media. There will be no cameraman to show that the company is actually socially responsible. They are the key steps that you have to cater for before you do the things that will come on TV for everybody to know that the company is socially responsible. Okay, so the last bit is what most of us are familiar with: philanthropy, offering scholarship for education, providing financial support for charities, building schools, building hospitals, donating to schools, donating to hospitals. This is what most people know to be socially responsible, CSR, being corporate, socially responsible. And that is also right. Okay, but as I indicated much earlier, as much as most managers want to go for point A, 8, it is important that we address 6 and 7 very, very well before we get into 8. All right. You cannot be treating your employees anyhow unfairly. You cannot be cheating your investors and shareholders. And then on the other hand, projecting yourself as a philanthropic organization. That is not morally sound. Okay. All right. But all of this, from ecological concerns, consumerism, to philanthropy, all these 8 areas are the important areas of CSR. if you want to be socially responsible as an organization, you want to pay attention to these 8 areas that we've just looked at. Okay, so social responsibility of a business. The obligation of any business to protect and serve the public interest is known as the social responsibility of business. All right, so you need to find a way to protect the interests of the public. You are not there just to make profit. So from a socio-economic perspective, the social responsibility of organizations extends beyond profit maximization. It argues for the necessity of profit maximization while addressing the needs of society. So yes, we want to acknowledge, and as I indicated much earlier, I love Carroll's pyramid because it gives a realistic perspective of how CSR should be pursued by organization. Okay, you must begin providing a product or rendering a service that is profitable before you can think about CSR. So that is the base. All right. So having profit motive or working in order for your organization to become profitable is not really bad. But the whole idea is that is not the end of it. Okay. In your quest of making profit, at the same time, you should find a way to address the needs of society. Don't destroy society because you want to make profit. And after you've made profit as well, don't forget to address the needs of society. Okay. Ultimately, the reason why businesses are set up is to address the needs of society. So what shall it profit you as an organization to destroy the very reason why the company was set up because you want to make profit? All right. So we need that balance, make profit, but at the same time, show concern in addressing the needs of society. So social responsibility therefore implies that an organization must not harm society at large while it does its business activities. So no need to harm society and the quest in your course of doing your activities as a business. So what are the importance? What are the benefits of CSR to a business organization? Is it worth it at all to take huge sums of money that you could have used to reinvest in your operations or pay good salaries and so on and so forth, and then end up giving it away as corporate social responsibility? Are there any benefits of CSR? We have some of them here. Point 1 says it creates goodwill for the business among the public. Very, very important. And goodwill has its own place in doing business. So let's add point 2 to that because they are close. It creates positive public image. So goodwill, good public image, or positive public image are important tools, okay, when it comes to sales, when it comes to marketing. All right. So if you have goodwill among the populace, among your consumers, then whenever they're thinking about buying a particular product, they will be thinking about your company because they have your company at heart and will be willing to support your company. So the image issue can translate into business results such as getting more sales and therefore making more profit. So it's very, very important as a company to seek to build goodwill, okay, among the public. All right. So later I'll be looking at that. If you have very goodwill, even when you find yourself in trouble with government or any other regulatory institution, you have the public or the community coming to your aid. Sometimes their support counts a lot in being able to deal with some of these political threats. So you can't discount goodwill. It is important to have goodwill. It is important to have positive public image because, as I said, it can go a long way to influence purchasing decisions and therefore how profitable your company can be. Point 3, it helps in long-term survival and growth of a business. So it flows from that particular point. Okay, if you operate unethically, if you operate and you are not conscious about the negative impact of your activities on society, most of the time, the community itself will rise up against you, even if regulatory bodies don't come after you. Okay, and we've seen several cases of people, the youth just going to some mining companies burning their cars, burning their facilities. It's not a justification, though. It is not justified. It is a crime and it's punishable by law. But the whole idea is that before these guys are dealt with and so on and so forth, the business activities has come to a halt. Okay, so why not find a way to address the needs of the community? Why not probably get them involved by way of job creation or employment opportunities for the people in the area? Don't forget, we said one of the important areas of CSI is the community. Engage the community, get them involved. Okay, if they are part of the company or the business, they know that if we burn this company, we are burning our very livelihood. But what happens is that most of the time, this, especially mining companies, they set up in various communities, destroy water bodies, destroy the afforestation or forest, whatever, and landscape of the particular area. And yet the youth of the community are not employed in these organizations. All right. People far away from the very community within which they're operating are rather employed. If that happens, it becomes very easy for the youth to stop the activities of these particular companies. So for the sake of the long-term survival and growth of the business, it is very, very important for a company to engage in CSR. And within our context of explanation, your immediate community becomes very, very important, okay? If we want to extend the explanation to quality of products, yes, it becomes very clear. Once the image or somebody finds the quality of your products to be defective, okay, with this day and age of social media publication, your business is almost collapsing because of poor quality of the products or services that you render. So it's important that in the interest of the long-term survival and growth of your business, a business or company should make sure they engage in corporate social responsibility. All right, point 4, it provides satisfaction to employees, and this factor is directly related to productivity. You remember one of the major areas of CSR that we just discussed is regards to labor relations. And I spent a lot of time on that because there are too many empirical cases where the organization doesn't pay their workers well, they maltreat their workers, they cheat their workers, and yet in the eyes of the public, this organization or business is good because they will rather spend those monies engaging in philanthropic activities instead of catering for the needs of their employees. Okay. And obviously that has a negative impact on productivity. So if we're to reverse the explanation, then we can say that a company that really caters and addresses the needs of their employees and their welfare will most likely energize these employees to be more productive. And this productivity will translate to better sales will translate into profit, and so on and so forth. Okay, so CSR will lead to employee satisfaction will lead to productivity, and so on and so forth. If we even explain it, explain it beyond the immediate concerns of employees, such as good salary and bonuses and leaves and so on and so forth, there are ethically conscious employees that will be willing to work hard for a company that they think is making an impact on society, because they see their contribution to society or the world to be something beyond themselves, right? So if I'm working for a company that is also catering for the needs of people that are sick in the hospital, or catering for the educational needs of people that couldn't have paid their school fees, then yes, I'll feel that I'm contributing positively and I'm impacting positively as far as this world is concerned. And that can energize or boost my morale to want to work harder for such an organization. All right. So CSR, whether it's directly towards the employee or it is towards the community or general philanthropic activity has a way of stimulating the efforts of employees for them to work hard for a particular organization. Okay. Point 5, consumers have become more conscious about their rights. That is so right. And so it is important to address their needs. It is important that in serving consumers, you are careful the quality of the products and services that you offer to them. You remember our point about consumerism? You want to be careful that you don't give out deceptive advertisement just to entice people to buy your products. Okay, in the short term, you may make money, but when the lawsuits start flying, you are likely to get into trouble. So you have to be socially responsible, because we're now dealing with highly educated and employees that are very consumers that are very conscious about their rights. One list mistake, and they are out there in the courts, sending you to court and so on and so forth. So to avoid legal costs and all that, it is important to operate in a socially responsible manner. Okay. Point 6, it ensures compliance with government regulations. Yes, that's the basis, the basic point, the starting point of CSR. You need to be an organization that complies with laws. And this point should not be underrated, complying with government regulations. When I was explaining the survival at some point, I told you that just disobeying certain policies and regulations can spell the doom of your organization. All right. So once you pursue CSR, it saves you from that trouble, because there is the higher tendency that you will be compliant with government regulations and government rules. And that will save your company, and that will ensure the survival of your organization. Okay. So organizations need to demonstrate their social responsibility to various stakeholders by complying with the following aspects. So basically, this social responsibility is for the stakeholders of the business organization. So we want to look at various stakeholders and their interests. What do they want a company to do for them, or an organization to do for them to consider that particular organization to be socially responsible? All right. So if we take point 1, so for investors and shareholders, they want reasonable returns on their investment. And I think I've explained this already. So you cannot be declaring losses. You cannot be a company that is not paying dividends, and yet on another breath, you're spending the monies of the company to engage in CSR. Investors and shareholders will not be happy with you. Okay. When it comes to financial institutions, how will they see a socially responsible company? To them, a company is socially responsible when they make prompt repayment of loans. Okay. So if you don't pay back the loans that you go for from financial institutions, and they see you on TV making donations, that is almost like an insult to them. All right. So to financial institution, lending institutions, yes, you are only socially responsible after you've made repayment of the loans that you came for from them. So it is important for us to know their interest. All right. To employees, how do they define the socially responsible company? So a company that pays salaries and ensures social security, their social security is deemed to be socially responsible. Once again, a company that provides care and comfort to their employees at the workplace and meets statutory requirements such as holidays, sick leave, maternity leave, overtime payments, they see such a company to be socially responsible. All right. So if you don't do this and you engage in philanthropy to your employees, you are not socially responsible. You are actually a very, very wicked organization. Okay. So it is important to know the interest of employees when it comes to their conceptualization of corporate social responsibility. To governments, You are only socially responsible if you pay in your taxes. So payment of taxes to the government is what the government will see as being a socially responsible company. And when we're explaining government regulations, yes, I mentioned that it is very, very important to comply with government relations. Yes, to comply with government policies, laws, and so on and so forth. And tax evasion was something that I mentioned, that you want to avoid it as much as possible. Because if you were caught in the net, it can cause a very bad image and trouble for you going forward, because you cannot fight the government. Okay, it can create a lot of mess for your company. So to government, once you pay in your taxes, they are okay with you. They will see you to be a socially responsible company, because these taxes then will be used for other infrastructure activities. Okay. 6, for customers and consumers, providing quality goods and services according to their money's worth. It's a company that will see to be socially responsible. So if they're buying something with their money, they expect that the return will be worth the kind of investment or money that they have paid for that particular product. So all of these stakeholders have their peculiar interests and needs, and it's up to the manager to know how to address all of them. And for me, I think it is always better to deal with the internal stakeholders, i.e., make sure you address the needs of your employees, make sure you address the needs of your shareholders or investors, if it is an SME, before thinking about the other things. So that whilst doing the other philanthropic activities, they will actually be excited and supportive of the company. Okay, they will not be cursing the manager in their hearts that they, instead of paying us well, you rather using the money to get some publicity stunts and so on and so forth. Okay. Advantages for socially responsible organizations. So it's very, very similar to the reasons why companies must be socially responsible, the points we've explained earlier. So point 1, public expectations. Public opinion supports a business pursuing a social goal. Okay, and this will bring about the goodwill that we spoke about. We spoke about good image, public image, because they expect that a company will actually pursue social goal. And once you're doing that, it can uplift your image and the goodwill that they have for your organization. It can lead to long-term profit, and this is quite important. In the short term, engaging in CSR is quite expensive because it means investing or taking money out of your business operations. Okay, but in the long term, as you build a good image and good relations with the public, it then translates into purchasing decisions. And these purchasing decisions can help you to be profitable for a very long period of time. Okay, so public image is here. A business creates a favorable public image by pursuing social goals. We've explained that. That leads to better environments. A socially responsible organization attracts better staff or employees, all right? Because we've already explained, if you are socially responsible, you treat your employees well. You pay them well, you respect them, you address their other non-financial concerns like sick leave, maternity leave, and so on and so forth. So that is an environment that most talented employees will want to work in. Okay. Discouragement of further government regulations. Bad behavior attracts government intervention. All right. Once the government sees you to be somebody that is not socially responsible, and we've already explained what the government's interest. The interest of government is in payment of taxes largely. All right. Once they pursue you not to be socially responsible, then they become more interested in your activities. The scrutiny becomes higher, and that can lead to the downfall of your business organization. So you want to avoid that altogether by doing your best to honor your tax obligations and obeying other rules and regulations to prevent further government scrutiny. Okay, once they want to find fault with you, they will be able to do that. So you want to avoid that as much as possible by being socially responsible. Okay. Advantages: it helps to balance responsibility and power. Any imbalance encourages irresponsible behavior. So what happens is that if you become only money conscious, the profits that you earn and the money that you earn will make you powerful. Okay. And if you don't balance that power, that wealth with the desire to impact society positively, that can really lead to very devastating consequences. Okay. So it's like let's say any bad guy, an armed robber, being very, very prosperous and yet not conscious about the welfare of people, then they can buy more ammunition, they can buy more guns and do more evil things in society. Okay, so there must be a balance between the power, how powerful you've become, and your concern for society. Because if you get the resources and you are not mindful of society and you were destroying the society, the more resources and wealthier that you become, the easier it is to continue with the destruction of the society as you began. Okay. It promotes shareholders' interests. We've explained that lightly. It is very, very important to know that most of the time when we talk about CSR, it's as though it's anti the desires and the needs of shareholders. No, the starting point of CSR is actually addressing the needs of shareholders. So CSR says address the needs of your shareholders or investors first. And once that is satisfied and there are extra whatever, then we can be thinking about how to deal with the other stakeholders of the business. So it promotes the interest of shareholders. Sorry. Yes, it also supports the superiority of prevention over chaos. A socially responsible business can act on some problems before they become too serious. All right. So if you are socially responsible, you are always conscious about the impact of your activities on society. Okay, so because of that, there is the tendency that you can see some problems at the initial stages, help solve them before they become very huge problems to deal with. What are the disadvantages of socially responsibility CSR? Point one, it could lead to violation of profit maximization. Okay, so in truth, the money that is being given away to help societal cause part of the profit or should be part of the profit of the company. And so instead of reinvesting that in order to maximize the profit for shareholders, part of this money is being given away. And that's the violation of the profit maximization idea of a business. Okay, the main reason why shareholders invest and the main reason why businesses exist is to maximize profit. Point two is very similar, dilution of purpose. It leads to waste of time and resources. The waste of time and resources can lead to dilution of the purpose of the organization. All right. So that is not our purpose. Our purpose is not, for example, if we're a bank, our purpose is not to give charity, right? Our purpose is to give out loans. Okay, so from all this idea of we donating to schools and so on and so forth, and training people and so on and so forth, it dilutes, it clouds, it takes away our focus on the main reason why the business actually exists. Cost, so it's very related to violation of profit maximization. A socially responsible business may have to absorb the cost of its social programs or pass it on to its customers. All right. So it leads to increase in the cost of production. And this may translate into higher prices if the company decides now to pass it on to customers or consumers. Four, there is also the argument of too much power to corporations or businesses. A business becomes too powerful if it pursues both economic and social goals. Okay, remember we said that if they tend to have goodwill in the eyes of the public, we said that they have a positive public image, and politicians don't like that. All right. Because then if you become too powerful, and as I indicated much earlier, if they want to regulate you fairly, you tend to have the back and the support of the community within which you are operating. Okay. And when you go to the multinational level, sometimes they can even direct national governments as to what they should do because of the economic power that they have. Okay. So once they support society and everything, they tend to win the goodwill of society. Society is on their side instead of being on the side of government. And that can create problems for the politicians. So that is the other disadvantage. All right. If it is the company that is giving us water, it's the company that is giving us good roads, electricity, then what business do you have as a politician to come and be directing us as to what to do? We'll rather listen to the company instead of listening to the government or the politician. Disadvantages continue. Point 5 says business persons may not be good at dealing with social issues. So that's the other problem. Okay, so if we were to set up and our business is basically banking, then what skill do we have in construction that we now want to build a school for a particular community? What business do we have in drilling of boreholes and so on and so forth? So businesses do not have skills for most of the things that they want to support in, and that is the other argument against CSR. Then it could lead to lack of accountability. Social leaders, unlike political parties, are not held responsible for their social activities, all right? So some managers, some business executives, some CEOs may use this CSR as an opportunity to also loot from the organization, okay? Because really the accountability is not that strict. You just have to indicate that in your budget, you donated 100,000 for this particular charity. Okay, the behind the scenes reasons why it went to that charity and not the other charity is something that we cannot tell. Okay, the reasons why we supported that particular cause, the school, instead of supporting sick people in the hospital, is something that we cannot explain. So that's the other point, that it could lead to lack of accountability if we allow organizations or companies to engage in that. Then lack of broad public support. The public is divided on whether a business should be involved in social activities. So that is the contention. All right. Some argue, as we just said, that they don't have skills in that particular area. Some argue that that is not their purpose, as we've seen earlier, and that they should concentrate on their main reason why they were set up. Others feel that they are corporate citizens, and as all reasonable citizens, they must help in developing society in which they operate, and so on and so forth. So there is some contention for the support of CSR. Okay, so that is the end as far as the CSR aspect is concerned. Don't forget our topics about social responsibility and ethics. All right, I must add that the ethics also goes with values. So it is very, very important as a manager to be conscious, as I indicated in the intro, that even though your purpose is to help and guide your organization to be profitable, at the end of the day, the reason why the business was set up in the first place is to address the needs of society. Okay, and there are several stakeholders in society. We have employees, we have your own shareholders or investors that have invested in your business. We spoke about lenders and financial institutions. We spoke about government. We spoke about the community within which you are operating. So don't just be fixated on being profitable only. Be conscious about how your activity is likely to impact the other stakeholders of your organization. More importantly, if you're into the extractive industry, you want to be careful how your operations affect the natural environment. Okay, we're currently having a huge battle as far as Galamsey is concerned. And if you're in that sector, you owe it as a corporate citizen, as the manager, to direct your company to do that which is right by protecting and preserving the ecological and natural environment. Okay, so we'll move to the second part, and it is within the same idea that as a manager, you need to operate and manage with some level of conscience. All right, don't just make decisions because they'll bring money. That is not the ultimate aim of any good business. You need to have conscience. You need to have dealings in deciding in your dealings to know that this is right, this is not right. I will do this. I won't do this. And most of the time, these are hinged on the kind of values that you have as an individual. Okay, so even though we're talking about companies and organizations and businesses, most of the time it boils down to the people, management, those that are in charge of of running or managing the business organization. Okay, that is why we have to touch a little bit on ethics and values. Okay, based on the virtues ethics theory, if we were to get you, the manager, to be more ethical and conscious about upholding good values, then we can be certain that the organization or the company will be managed properly, and properly not just in terms of it being profitable, but properly in terms of also addressing the needs of other stakeholders of the organization. Okay, so let's look at the second part of our topic today. So look at values. So top 2005 defines values as the core principles that define for individuals what are ideal personal standards. Okay, so your values will determine a lot of things about you, because it helps you to know when it comes to an ideal personal standards, how an ideal person should behave. Those decisions will be made out of your values. Okay, things that you cherish, things that you hold high esteem, will influence your decisions as to how you should live. So values are reflected in the way one treats people, the approach to one's work, and one's basic work ethic. All right. So if you believe in, say, justice, it will influence the way you treat other people. If you believe in hard work, it will influence the way you work, your work ethic and all that. If you believe in fairness, it will influence the way you relate with your subordinates and so on and so forth. Okay, so the value that you place on fairness, for example, will influence how you decide among your subordinates when there is any conflict or an issue. Most of the time, you will not know at the spur of the moment that it's your value for justice that is helping you to make those decisions. But most of our decisions, and I dare say all of our decisions, are likely to stem from the values that we have as managers. So it's important that we have good values or uphold good values in order to be able to make sound decisions. Okay, let's look at types of values. So there are two major types of values. We have terminal values and we have what is known as instrumental values. So terminal values are the desired states of existence, whilst instrumental values are the desirable modes of behavior. So terminal values are normally the end, what we want to achieve. For example, we want to be prosperous, right? We want to be successful. Even though for the sake of example, let's stay with that. So being successful could be a terminal value that you have. Instrumental value is what are the other things that you have to do? What other values will help you to be successful or prosperous in life? Okay, so when it comes to instrumental values, we can then have things like hard work, we can have things like honesty, we can have things like diligence, and all the other good things that you can think about. So being hardworking in itself is not the end of anybody. Most of the time we are hardworking because we have some end or some focus of something that we want to achieve. Okay, that which we actually want to achieve. And that is what I indicated much earlier, that we either want to be successful or want to be prosperous, we want to be happy, we want freedom. Those are what we classify as terminal values, the values that we want to achieve at the end of the day. Okay. And then we work out our instrumental values in order to be able to achieve our terminal values. So if you want to be prosperous, you want to be successful, you want freedom, that then will tell the type of values that you should have in terms of instrumental values. And I've mentioned them already, some of them. Hardworking, diligence, honesty, and so on and so forth can then come to play. Okay. So as a manager, at the personal level, you have to know your terminal value. And that is also very, very important. Most of the time, things that gets us into trouble is because we don't know when we've had enough. All right. We don't know as human beings because of the greed element and aspect of our life. We don't know even when we have become successful. We don't know when we should say it is okay. And our inability to note that normally is what will lead us into all manner of troubles and lead us into getting to prison and all that. It will shock you the caliber of people that you find in the prisons and all manner of places because of financial because of theft cases and other unethical decisions bordering on money. Okay. There are people that if you had 1/3 or 1/4 of their wealth, you will have been okay forever in your life. Okay. But they didn't define their terminal values right. All right. You have to know. If you tell me you want to be free, you have to know what it means. What amount will give you that particular level of freedom. If you want independence or free, whatever, yes, you have to know. What amount do I need to be financially independent? All right. And this should be realistic. This should be based on your needs. This should be based on if you want the desires that you have. And if you are conscious of it, you can meet all of this being ethical and being legal and being moral. You don't really have to steal in order to be able to meet your terminal values. But if you don't define them right, you won't even know when you've reached there. And the greed and the desire for more is likely to consume you. So as a manager, it's important for us to know our terminal values and then come up with the instrumental values that will help us to be able to meet these terminal values that we've had for ourselves. Okay. We can also have sub-classification of values. Values can also be defined in terms of espoused versus enacted. So espoused values are values that one wants others to believe they hold, right? While enacted values are the values in use, that is what they practice. Okay, so it's very, very important. The irony is that almost all of us want to be seen to be good people. So yes, we are always happy when somebody makes very good statements about our character, even though inside of us we know the person might just be deceiving us and so on and so forth. All right, but we are happy with that. But there is a difference between espoused value, how you want people to perceive you, how you project yourself, and who you really are. As a manager, you want to hold these things consistent, right? You have to find a way to connect your espoused values with your enacted value. That will help you in influencing and persuading your people. They know you don't have two-face. Of course, you may be a different person at home than at work, but if you have certain values that are meant for work, those values must be consistent. All right. What you want to portray should actually be who you are at the workplace. So ethics, Top again define ethics as the implementation of what a group's value system defines as good or bad and the behavior necessary to fulfill ideal states. Okay, so the implementation of what a group's value system defines as good or bad. So within organizational system, you don't have to leave these decisions of good or bad to the individual. Okay, from this definition, you need to have a system in place that is based on the values of the organization. And if you want the values of the management of the organization, that will help everybody to conduct themselves based on the system that is in place. So the system should be help people to know that which is good and which is bad, and therefore the type of behavior that is acceptable in that particular organization. Okay, so this ethics at this point is not just personal ethics, it's within the context of your organization. You need to have standards in place. So it comprises the standards of conduct that indicates how one should behave based on moral duties and virtues, primarily based on the principles of right and wrong. There are two aspects of ethics. One is to discern right from wrong, and the other one is to do what is right, good, and proper. Okay, so my point really is that as a manager, don't leave ethical decisions to the judgment of your employees. The organization must have its standards in place, and that will help people to fit in and be able to make their decisions as to whether something is ethical or not. Okay. So that brings us to the idea of the concepts of ethics and values, and that we're looking at code of ethics. Okay. So you don't want to leave ethical judgments to individual employees. You need code of ethics in place to help with that. All right. So a code of ethics and therefore a code of conduct specify the ethical standards that members of the organization, either individually or in a group, should comply with to stay as member of the group. So we are not leaving it to you as an individual to decide. We have specified what you can do and what you cannot do. And if you want to stay in the organization, then you must keep to what we say you should be doing. Okay, so that is what I was saying, for every organization to manage it properly, you need what is known as code of ethics, so that in spite of your background, what you consider to be right is no longer important. You've decided to join that particular organization, and therefore, what the organization deemed to be right is what you should do. What the organization says is wrong, it should be wrong to you, in spite of your personal upbringing and your personal opinions. Okay, so a code of ethics consists of documented and transparent statements underlying the expected behavior of the members of the organization that reflect on their day-to-day working, including decision-making. Although theoretically, a code of ethics and a code of conduct are different, operationally, they are considered to be the same. All right. So basically, some organizations may have a code of ethics, others may have what they call code of conduct. Okay. Some almost the same, but minor difference. The code of ethics is more like a statement of values and beliefs that the organization endorses. The code of conduct, on the other hand, translates the values, i.e., documented in the code of ethics, into specific behavioral statements. All right. So this one tells you the behavior that is expected. This code of ethics is basically the do's and don'ts based on the values of the organization. But generally, both are meant to regulate the behavior of employees in a particular organization. So you don't have that discretion to decide. Okay, if we're to leave it to the employees, some may have what may be in line with what the organization needs or wants. Others may have ethical beliefs and decisions that are totally different from what the organization seeks for itself. So it's important to have code of ethics, or if you want, code of conduct in place in an organization. Components of code of ethics. So it must have a preamble. And this is a brief background statement that articulates the organization's basic mission and values. So you need to have that as the beginning or starting point of your code of ethics. 2, it must have personal integrity, a statement on personal integrity. It is a pledge based on one's integrity that represents the organization's commitment to dealing with others fairly and truthfully. Okay, so you're pledging based on your personal integrity that as a member of this particular organization, I pledge on my own integrity to deal with others fairly and truthfully. That's the starting point. All right. If you pledge with your integrity, that means on your own accord, you are promising without any supervision, whether people are there or not, that you treat or deal with others fairly and truthfully. Okay, it should have aspects of professional excellence. This constitutes characteristics and behavior, such as respect for others, fair evaluation, and positive regard, which become a model for the board, the staff, and the volunteers to follow. So it should have dimensions of the type of behavior that you want people to have. Okay, so respect for others, fair evaluation. For example, if you're into sales or whatever it is, and you have to do evaluation, will you be cheating your clients or customers because they don't have the knowledge? Okay, so if the person, assuming you were the one selling and the person was coming to buy, because the person is ignorant in that particular industry, will you undervalue or overvalue a particular asset because you want to charge that your client very more? Okay, that is the fair evaluation. If you were the one going to buy, will you undervalue a particular asset because you want to buy it cheap? Okay, so there should be statements that will tell us the characteristics and behavior that everybody must have. So it includes the board, the staff, and if you have volunteers, people that will come and volunteer for the organization, they have to follow these characteristics or behavior patterns that have been set in the code of ethics. It should contain elements of accountability and responsibility. So this emphasizes good stewardship, the organization's responsibilities to its constituents and the constituents' responsibilities to the organization. All right. So you should have elements of accountability and responsibilities. What are we supposed to do to our various stakeholders or constituents? What do we expect from them? How do we hold ourselves accountable to give explanations to our constituents for the type of action or decisions that we took? There should be aspects of accountability and responsibility in code of ethics. Then there should be a statement on equal opportunity and diversity. So it establishes the organization's commitment in hiring and other personal practices. All right. So, for example, there won't be discrimination when it comes to hiring. We will not be hiring based on just gender. We will not be hiring based on tribe. We will not be hiring based on old school boys and so on and so forth. But the decisions will be based on fairness. So we'll pursue equal opportunity and diversity. The code of ethics needs to address that. The code of ethics must talk about conflict of interest. All right. It represents a mandatory value statement that specifically mentions that all decisions are in the best interest of the organization. So you don't put yourself in a position where you benefit personally as an employee of the organization against the interests of the organization. All right. And I've always been talking about situations where employees set up parallel businesses like where they have been employed, and sometimes refer employees to those organizations, even though where they are currently working has the same product or rendering the same service. You want to avoid that. You want to avoid decisions in which you benefit personally. All right. The decisions are such that at the end of the day, you'll be the one profiting from that. You want to avoid all of that. But as a good manager, you don't want to leave that to employees or your staff to decide. There must be code of ethics that will specify when you should not be part of a particular decision-making committee and so on and so forth. Okay. So what are the benefits of having code of ethics in your organization? Point one, a documented code of ethics sets the standards and can help in resolving any ethical dilemma. So when I find myself torn as to what to do. For example, the conflict of interest that we just spoke about. I just have to go to the code of ethics and see what the code of ethics says I can do or I cannot do in such situations. Okay, so it takes away ethical dilemma. Once the code says I can do this, then I go by it. If the code says I cannot, then it's easy for me to make decisions in the course of being in that particular organization. Point 2, it provides clear guidelines to tackle both internal and external relationships of organizations, and also for decision-making that is compliant with one's ethics and values. So guidelines are just as like point 1. It's very easy to make decisions when dealing with both your internal and external stakeholders, because you just rely on your code of ethics to be able to make those decisions. Okay. Members of the organization can also integrate their values with that of the organization and restrain themselves from any ethical violation. So as I said, managers should not govern or manage based on the personal ethics of their employees. Okay, you need this code of ethics so that all employees will align. It doesn't matter whether that is not how you want things to be done. Once there are code of ethics, you need to find a way to adjust your own ethical behavior to fall in line with the code of ethics of that particular organization. So they are able to integrate, okay, their values with those of the organization. So if you didn't have any value like sense of justice or fairness, all right, you believe that in making decisions, you have to favor people of your kind, either your tribe or your old school guys, and so on and so forth. The code of ethics will raise the issue of fairness as a value. And that will take you away from your old idea of employing people of your kind or treating people of your kind fairly, to a point where you have to integrate it to the fairness that the organization wants to pursue as a value, or what the organization has as a value. Point 4, all stakeholders of the organization feel happy since ethics compliant decisions benefit them. Okay, so it is quite comforting to be working in an organization that is ethical, because at the minimum, you expect that you be treated with fairness, and whatever that is supposed to be due you will be something that you will get. And so all stakeholders, customers will be treated well, employees will be treated fairly, shareholders will be treated fairly, and all the other stakeholders as well. So really, it is quite comforting, and you feel comfortable working in an organization that is ethical. So the steps to implement a code of ethics, implementing code of ethics in the workplace. This is very, very important for every manager to know. So point 1 is to identify the chairperson for the ethics committee. Such a person needs to be from the top management. So you need the support of top management for these codes of ethics to be operational at the workplace. And the chair of that particular committee should be part of top management. It will show the importance that top management attaches to ethical conduct and ethical behavior in that particular organization. Okay, point 2, make the members of the board agree on the code of ethics. So everybody must accept the code of ethics as far as the board is concerned. Point 3, identify issues relating to values and ethics. This is done by duly listing the issues that are perceived by employees as well as the management as being sensitive in nature. So it is important to note the issues that will be serving as the standards for making decisions. That is, we're talking about the values and the ethics of the organization. The organization must come to accept what they would deem to be values and what they will see to be ethical. 4, emulate the best practices models of world-class organizations and select the best fit, keeping in mind its degree of compatibility meeting organizational needs. All right, that is where point point 3 is actually very, very important. As an organization, you must actually first identify your own values and ethics. And then point 4, you go out there to look out for best practices, okay, as far as the code of ethics is concerned. But at the same time, in thinking about best practices, those practices must be compatible with your organization. The context, the environment, everything could be different from yours. So it is very, very important that in looking out for best practices, there should be practices that reflect the nature and of the environment within which you are operating your business. All right. Point 5, develop the code of ethics with due cognizance of specific organizational needs. So yes, part of the best practice is that they must be something that serve the needs of your organization. The best practices, they could be best practices, all right. But if they don't help you address your organizational needs, they may not be suitable for your type of organization. 6, understand its degree of compatibility both within and outside the organization, right? Then 7, document the finalized code of ethics and make it transparent for all stakeholders. Many organizations publish their code of ethics on their website. So it should be something that everybody sees and the organization knows. In fact, there should be training for people to get to know the code of ethics of that particular organization. As rightly indicated, some organizations have them on their website, so you can easily know what the acceptable behavior is in a particular organization. Point 8 says, make the code of ethics compulsory for all employees. I think this has been emphasized earlier. It is not optional, and it is not based on your personal bias and preferences. Once we agree that this is the ethical standard, these are the ethical standards that we want to live our life by, as far as the organization is concerned, it becomes mandatory for all employees of the organization. So as a manager, you must make the ethics compulsory for all employees. This is also critical because if you don't do that, there's the tendency nobody will take the ethics code of ethics seriously, because to some, it is enforceable. When it comes to others, you look the other way. That is not right. You make it enforceable for all employees in the organization. Okay. Training in ethics. I said it much earlier that it will be also important to train your people, your employees, as far as the code of ethics of the organization is concerned. Don't take it for granted that they should know. No. Knowing is even different from executing. So it's very, very important to make time and resources available for training in ethics. So after documentation of the code of ethics, it is necessary to train all employees in the organization. Training in ethics yields better results when it is conducted by the leaders of the organization through setting an example for everyone to follow. So I think this is obvious. Yes, there may be scheduled periods for training, but the best way to train as a leader or as the manager is to lead by example. Once they know that you are obeying and following the code of ethics, it sends a very strong message for everybody to follow suit in terms of respecting the code of ethics and going by the requirements of the code of ethics. The best approach to ethics training is to customize it, keeping pace with the needs of the organization. So as we indicated much earlier, don't just go and pick some code of ethics in some organization and seek to enforce it in your organization. It may not work because of the level and the stage of your organization. So you can keep updating it as your organization grow and new things come up and so on and so forth. You may want to modernize your or revise your code of ethics to cater for the needs of your organization as they come up. Okay, but you always have to look at the needs of your organization and pick codes of ethics that will help in addressing those needs. So what are the benefits of ethical practices in an organization? Why is it important at all for an organization to behave ethically, to have ethical standards and practices? First point says it leads to competitive advantage. So customers favor organizations that are known for their ethical practices. Okay, so ethics is basically, if you're ethical, what it means is that you'll always want to choose good over bad, right over evil. And for customers, that could mean life and death. Okay, so if you are an ethical organization, the customer is certain that you will not provide him or her with, say, expired products or poor or bad services. He or she, as a customer, knows that when he's buying from an ethical organization, is somewhat guaranteed or assured of fair price as far as the price of the products that is coming to buy is concerned. If he's dealing with an ethical organization, he knows that if there is any fault and it is not as a result of his wrongdoing, it is easy for him to come return that particular product and get some refund and so on and so forth. So customers generally will feel comfortable working with ethical organizations than those that are not ethical. Point two say it leads to better staff attraction and retention. Yes, so for employees as well, they are rational beings. We just spoke about the fact that ethical organizations tends to cater for their employees better. They think about their welfare. They will pay you fairly. Beyond that, ethical organizations already have good image and good brands. And for talented employees, it's not just about the salary or the money. They want to identify and associate with companies that have high image, reputation, and corporate image in the eyes of the public. So if you are an ethical organization, you stand a better position to be able to attract very talented and employees into your organization. Okay. Investment, the same arguments go for investment. Rational consumer investors and financial institutions will want to invest in an organization where they have some level of certainty that they will get their principal paid back and probably the interest as well. Okay. And for ethical organizations, to be ethical in the context of a lender or financial institution is you going back to pay as an organization the loans that they have given you with the interest, applicable interest. Okay. So in granting of loans or taking investment decisions, they are more likely to want to invest in an ethical organization. If you pick shareholders, we said the foundation of even CSR is to cater for the interests of your shareholders. Okay, and ethical organizations tend to have the sense of responsibility. They know the investors did not just invest their money for the fun of it. They want some return from their investment, and they will operate in such a way that they will be able to get these returns for investors. So rational investors, bankers, financial institutions are more likely and more willing to invest in ethical organizations than those that are not. Okay, then the morale and culture of the organization. Ethics compliant organizations create a workplace where employees feel compelled to work because they are less prone to stress, attrition, and dissatisfaction. So the morale and culture of ethical organizations are right. Okay, if you don't experience any form of discrimination, if you don't experience injustice in the organization, if you don't feel disrespected, then it tends to reduce stress. Attrition is the tendency. The easier one is labor turnover, all right? You don't have that tendency to want to quit the organization and so on and so forth. So if you are ethical, it helps you to treat your employees better, and that tend to reduce stress, the stress of your employee. It reduces the attrition rate in your organization, and it also minimizes the level of job satisfaction among your employees. Okay. Then reputation, I think this we've spoken about it over and over again. Okay, if you're an ethical organization, it helps in building the reputation of the organization. Okay, so it reduces bad scandals and disasters. Normally, where businesses lose their reputation is when they get into various kinds of scandals. But if you remain ethical, there is a higher tendency that you will minimize the extent to which you get involved in all kinds of bad scandals. Okay. Then 6, for legal and regulatory reasons, it is very, very important that organizations remain ethical. So globally, ethical issues are likely to come under legal and regulatory norms, making it compulsory for organizations to comply with them. And once you are ethical, it becomes easy. In fact, ethics goes beyond the requirements of the law. So legal and regulatory requirements are normally things that should be below ethical organizations. They don't struggle at all complying with rules and regulations and laws and statutes and so on and so forth. Okay, so once you need to be compliant with the law, and after you've satisfied the requirement of the law, then you move beyond the requirement and do that which is good and that which you think is right. So it makes it easy to comply with legal and regulatory requirements. Okay. 7, ethical organizations have the better chance of leaving a good legacy. Okay. So ethical consideration changes our perception of a legacy, which is not a pile of money at the cost of others' sufferings, but decisions and business practices that are beneficial to humankind. I've explained it earlier. The reason why businesses are set up is basically to address the needs of people. So if you end up destroying human lives to make up money, you are not living a good legacy. What it means is that you didn't have a purpose in the first place for starting that particular business. If you sat through to think through your reason for setting up that particular company, you realize that it should have been meant to address and promote the welfare of people. Okay, so it will not be a good legacy to cheat people, to destroy people, to cause suffering to people just because you want to make money. All right. So ethical organizations tend to have good legacy. Stakeholders and ethical organizations. I think we've touched on this. So there are several stakeholders, people who are likely to be affected, and people and institutions that could also impact the organization are normally known as the stakeholders of an organization. And from the very onset, we said that there is some relationship to being socially responsible, to being ethical, and how you address that will be based on your understanding of who your stakeholders are. If you have a proper understanding of who your stakeholders are, then you can direct your CSR and ethical behavior in addressing the needs of the stakeholders. Okay. And they could vary depending upon the type of organization. So you need, as an ethical organization, to know who your stakeholders are and try as much as possible to serve the interests of the stakeholder groups. All right. Building an ethical culture in organizations. So it's very, very important. The whole idea of having the code of ethics at the end of the day is not just for people to know the do's and don'ts in the organization, but you want it to get to the extent where it becomes the lifestyle of the people in the organization. That is when it becomes a culture. All right. So we need to find a way as a manager to build an ethical culture in your organization. So ethical culture consists of the ethical environment of an organization, which influences the ethical or unethical behavior of the members of the organization. So if it is right, it promotes ethical behavior. If that culture is not right, it will promote unethical behavior. Organizational culture and ethical research have shown that the ethical tone of an organization impacts upon how you make employees feel, whether this organization is an ethical organization or if it's not, tend to impact the following things: the efficiency and effectiveness in the organization, right? If you get the feeling that your organization is unethical, What it means is that they don't really care about the quality of the products and services that they sell to consumers or customers. They don't really care about any of the things that they do. All that they want is money. Then it affects the efficiency and the effectiveness of how employees behave and do things in the organization. Okay, it affects decision-making processes. If they are unethical, then when making decisions, you don't really care about the welfare and the well-being of other people. If this ethical organization, you don't make decisions just based on financial numbers, whether you make more money or not. You make decisions taking into cognizance the welfare of other people. So it affects decision-making processes. It affects staff commitment and job satisfaction. We've spoken about that. It affects staff stress. It affects staff turnover. Okay, so if it is an ethical organization, all things being equal, I'll feel that I'm being treated fairly. And so even this thoughts of searching for job won't even cross your mind because you are already comfortable with the organization that you are currently working in, right? But if it is an ethical organization, then it brings stress, and this stress will cause ethical employees to be seeking for ways to leave such an environment. So ethical organization tends to impact these things that we've seen. So there are different views on managerial ethics, all right? And we just want to take a look at some of them. And these views are views. They don't really mean that is the right thing to go by. But in theory, these are the various views that are available that we have to know. So we have what is known as a utilitarian view. According to this view, decisions are based on their outcomes or consequences. For example, provide the greatest good for the greatest number by laying off 20% of the staff so that the rest of the 80% can keep their jobs. So for the utilitarian view of managerial ethics, whenever a manager is going to take a decision, the manager should be thinking about a decision that will bring the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. All right. So the decision should be based on outcomes or consequences. If I will take a decision and it will result into benefiting a lot of people, just few people will suffer, then that decision is considered to be ethical according to this view. So that's the example we have there. Okay, if I have to make a decision and sack 20% of my workforce, and that decision of sacking them could lead to a better pay and better salary for the remaining 20%, according to the utilitarian view, that decision can be considered to be ethical. All right. But as I said, that is just the view, because sometimes decisions shouldn't just be based on consequences. Okay, we just have to do what is right or avoid that which is wrong, irrespective of consequences. But that is one view that managers can use in making their decisions. You want to find out, are there negative consequences? If that is the case, we want to avoid that. But if the positives of that decision outweigh the negatives, then utilitarian view says you can make that particular decision. Then we have the second view known as the rights view. According to this view, decisions are based on protecting the basic rights of individuals. For example, legally protecting privacy, even at the cost of productivity and efficiency. So if you compare this to utilitarian view, we can say that if protecting the privacy of your employees will cost you more, then you don't really have to invest in that, because the consequence could be severe in trying to protect the privacy of your employees. But the rights view doesn't look at decisions in that way. Okay, it says people have basic rights. They have the right to life, they have the right to property, they have the right to privacy, and all those type of human rights that are available. And so you cannot use numbers or consequences to make those decisions. That if we want to protect your rights, what it means is that we have to invest more, it will cost us more, and therefore we won't do that. No, the rights of individuals are things that have to be protected, and it should not be something that you negotiate with returns or outcomes in making such decisions. So based on this view, people have rights. All right. If you take it, for example, customers have the right to say quality products and services. It doesn't matter if we have to spend a lot more in terms of cost of production to provide them with quality products. All right. So if you're a manager operating with this view, this is how you will think that we have that burden to protect or serve the rights of our customers by providing them quality products, by offering them quality service, irrespective of the consequences. But utilitarian says, no, if it will cost us more in our bid to serve our customers better, that consequences could be severe, the immediate consequences, of course, and therefore, let's not go that way. Then we have the theory of justice view. According to this view, one seeks to impose and enforce rules fairly and impartially, exceeding the legal requirement. For example, helping those who are underrepresented or lack power. That is, one considers justice as opposed to entitlement. All right. So with this view, we're just seeking to go beyond the requirements of the law and help those that ordinarily can't help themselves. So it's just the just or the right thing to do. It is not based on any return that you get from the person. In fact, the person or the persons or the group or the institutions that you're seeking to protect are people that may not be able to defend themselves. All right. They don't even know their rights. And so if you are not an ethical manager or leader, you can cheat them, you can abuse them. But from the theory of justice, you have to go and do that which is right. And it is very, very important that under this theory is talking about exceeding the legal requirement. Most of the time, we can be operating or taking legal decisions, and yet those decisions will be unethical. So the fact that a particular decision is legal doesn't mean it is ethical. Much earlier, I gave the example of minimum wage in our jurisdiction. All right. In some countries or in some other economies, maybe the minimum wage means could be referred to as wage. It's something meaningful and people can live with that. But in our context, giving an adult or paying an adult a minimum wage, even though you've met the legal requirements, we cannot see that, we cannot agree with you if you consider that to be an ethical decision. Okay, so theory of justice, yes, you've made the minimum wage or you've paid them the minimum wage, but is that really ethical? Can you go beyond the legal requirement and pay the guys the living wage? Okay, or something far more reasonable than what the law says you should be paying your workforce. So that's the idea of the theory of justice view. As a manager, that can also guide you in making your decisions. So as I said, it really depends upon the situation and the consequences. Okay, the situation, sorry, that should determine the view that you should be picking. At some point, utilitarian view could be right. Okay, sometimes you need to be looking, for example, if you are into production, you should have done some calculations, known your cost of production and how much you can make in terms of profit margin before you proceed with the production. All right. So utilitarian view has its place in making decisions. Rights view has its place in making decisions. And theory of justice view has its place when it comes to managerial decisions. Okay. So we shouldn't just throw out any view and say that utilitarian view is not right. No, they all have situations in which they are applicable. Okay, but generally, the theory of justice is something that we should be considering when dealing with vulnerable groups, when dealing with society and environment where the laws and their enforcement are weak, such that we can get away with whatever that we want. If we find ourselves in that environment, we should be operating more based on the theory of justice view, where we go beyond the requirements of the law and do that which is right and fair to the community or society in which we are operating. Factors affecting managerial ethics. So degree of moral development of employees. It can be measured in terms of the degree of independence from outside influence. All right. So how will that affect the manager's ethics? All right. So the degree of your moral development of your employees, if they are morally developed, as in their personal upbringing, they are already people that are ethical, then it makes it very, very easy as a manager to be able to take ethical decisions and enforce them in the organization. All right. Because the guys you are dealing with already are morally upright people. The reverse is also true. If they are immoral, then it becomes very difficult for an ethical manager to lead or manage the organization. All right. Degree of perceived protection of self-interest. All right. So to what extent does the manager seek to protect his or a self-interest? That will influence the level of ethical decisions that they make. Most of the time, the managers or leaders make unethical decisions because they have some interest to protect. They want to benefit from those decisions. So the more you want to protect and project your self-interest, the higher the tendency that you'll be making unethical decisions. Okay, but if you don't want to protect your self-interest and you just want things to be done fairly, then it can help you to take more ethical decisions as a manager. Degree of perceived fulfillment of expectations of stakeholders. Okay, so to what extent do you want to make your stakeholders feel that their expectations have been fulfilled? This is something that is very, very tricky, because sometimes the pressure from stakeholders can cause you to be unethical. All right. Shareholders, for example, who always want situations where share prices will be going up, or want situations where every year the dividends that they are paid should be going up and all that. And that can put enormous pressure on managers to be making unethical decisions. So you want to be mindful of that, which stakeholders that you should try fulfilling their expectation. When it comes to customers, it's almost non-negotiable. You have to always seek to address and meet the expectations of your customers. But other stakeholders, as I've indicated, especially shareholders, as a manager, you want to be mindful. Your bid to always fulfill their expectations could drive you into making unethical decisions at some point in time. So you want to be careful. Okay. Then degree of perceived protection of personal ethical principles. Degree of perceived protection of personal ethical principles. Yes. So if the ethical principles you have personally as a manager are in line or in sync with the organization, then in your bid to protect your personal ethical principles, it helps in promoting the organizational ethics as well. Okay. But the problem comes in when there is a conflict. You believe something is right, but the organization doesn't accept that. Then it can reduce the level of ethical decisions that you can make in the organization. But as a good manager in all situations, the ethical standards of the organization should supersede your personal ethical principles. I think we've explained this much earlier. That is why we need code of ethics to subject all of our personal ethics as employees or stakeholders to that of the organizational code of ethics, so that we can all be on the same field as far as ethical behavior is concerned. Then characteristics of individual employees. I think this is similar to point one. So the type of employees that you're working with can influence your managerial ethics. All right. If they are ethical, as I said, it helps you in making ethical decisions. If they are unethical, that also may cause you to become an ethical manager. Then 6, perceived values about right and wrong. How do you attach values? There are managers that don't just care, as we've already indicated. They just want the money. So if you don't have those values as to high sense of justice, high sense of equity, fairness, accountability, integrity, yes, then it can influence your ethical behavior. Okay, so your perceived values about what is right and wrong definitely will be the basis upon which you make most of your ethical or most of your decisions. Then ego strength and personality of individual employees. So everything about your employees, all right, can affect your decisions, your ethical managerial styles and decisions, all right? Because you'll be working with these guys. If they are ethical, it helps for you to become an ethical manager and to practice ethical decisions and implement ethical decisions. But if they are not, that can influence your managerial ethics, okay? Then 8, whether there are structured and documented rules, regulations, policy, job descriptions, and code of conduct in the organization. Okay, if these things are available, then it can help you. You don't really have to struggle much to ensure that ethics becomes operational in the organization. That's why if you come in as a manager and these things are absent, you need to find a way to get them in place. You need to have structured and documented rules. You need regulations. Above all, you need code of conduct or code of ethics to guide the behavior of people. It will help you as a manager to ensure that ethics becomes the culture of the organization. Okay, that brings us to the last part, the culture of the organization itself. All right, if it has an ethical culture in the sense that everybody see ethical behavior to be the norm, then it becomes easy for you as the manager to go by ethics or to instill ethical decisions in the organization. But if the culture already doesn't favor ethical behavior, then you struggle. We are assuming you, the manager yourself, you are ethical, all right? If you yourself, you are not ethical, then that makes the whole thing really worse, okay? But the culture can either support you as an ethical manager or can work against you as an ethical manager. And here, I don't want to give examples, right? But we all have a fair idea when you mention certain institutions, the impression and the image that they have in the public. So imagine going there as a manager, all right? Sometimes your own relatives will just caution you because if you want to disrupt their system and their way of living and doing things, it can sometimes cost you your life, all right? If you want to insist on doing the right things in such organizations. So the culture of the organization, very key in influencing managerial ethics. Okay. So ethical decision-making, we're looking at framework, and it's very, very similar to the views that we've just explained. Much earlier, we spoke about some views, yes, different views on managerial ethics, okay? The same idea will provide a framework in helping you to be able to make ethical decisions. So managers can justify their decisions by choosing one of the following alternatives, and they may even term these decisions ethical. So these points, as we've noted much earlier, will help you in making the decisions. As I indicated earlier, you just have to know when it is appropriate to use which approach or which view in making your decisions. So we have the utilitarian approach. This approach to ethical decision-making focuses on the common good of the people. For example, if a labor-intensive organization substitutes their production process with the latest state-of-art technology, unskilled people may lose their jobs by this in the larger interest of the organization and its other stakeholders. So we're looking at outcomes here or consequences here. If we come with latest state-of-art technology, yeah, we are likely to lay off a lot of unskilled people. But then we want to compare that to the larger interest, where the organization is likely to produce more in terms of quantity, produce more in terms of quality, serve the interests of customers better, make more profit. Then we conclude that it is better to implement that technology and lay off those unskilled people instead of keeping them and not getting the returns that we'll have gotten from the technology. All right. So utilitarian approach is basically looking at outcomes or consequences, as we've seen earlier. Once the outcomes or the results would will exceed the cost, then we should make that particular decision based on this approach. All right. It makes sense until your relatives or yourself find yourself among these unskilled people, all right, where they have to let you go because they now want to make more money over your own well-being and welfare and so on and so forth. But it's one approach of making decision that managers can use in making decision. Then you can also use the moral rights approach. Ethical decisions on moral rights are based on moral principles and therefore are independent of decisional consequences or outcomes. Okay, so here we are not looking at outcomes or results. We're basically asking ourselves whether it is a morally right decision to make. Okay, if this right decision, then we don't care about the consequences. Whether the organization will lose profit or lose sales, that is still the morally right decision to make. Okay, and that brings to mind these automobile companies. I think Toyota has done it before, where after the sale of a particular type brand of Toyota, they realized that the brakes were not working right, and they had to do a recall of these cars. Okay, I'm sure most of their customers wouldn't have been able to detect that there was something faulty about the braking system or something of that sort. But as an ethical organization, I want to believe they, on their own accord, decided to recall all of these cars that they are sold to the world. Can you imagine the cost implications of this particular decision? Okay. Yes. So if we're using the utilitarian approach only, then it will not make sense to take that decision of recalling this product. And it is not just Toyota. There are other several companies, ethical companies, that have done that as well. Okay. And here, the decision will be based on the moral right. It is not based on consequences or utilitarian approach. Then we have universalism. This type of ethical decision follows the principles of the Golden Rule. The core of the Golden Rule essentially lies in the following two aspects. To what extent a particular action applies to all people under all circumstances. Two, to what extent the decision makers will like others to impose such decisions on them. All right. So basically, the Golden Rule, we all know, do unto others as you want them to unto you. But this time I want to pay attention whether the doing unto others is something that is universally acceptable. Okay. So sometimes if you grew up in a family where you were maltreated, you were marginalized, that becomes your norm. All right. So if we don't provide a universalism, what it means is that if you find somebody, you maltreat the person and you shout, scream at the person, then that you'll still be following the Golden Rule, isn't it? You are doing unto other people what has been done unto you. But that is not the case. That's why point one is there. To what extent a particular action applies to all people under all circumstances? Okay, is it normal to be screaming at people? Is that what is acceptable across board? We are not looking at your peculiar circumstances. Okay, so we look at things that are universally applicable and acceptable as being good, and ask yourself that if you don't do that to other people, and if you were in their situation, how would you feel? All right. If you were in their shoes, will you be okay to be treated the same way as you treating them? Okay. Right. Then cost-benefit approach, very similar to consequential under this utilitarianism. Under this approach, ethical decisions are taken, balancing the costs and benefits between the decisions taken and the decisions not taken. All right. So what are the benefits for decisions that we make and against not making that particular decision? Ways to test ethical decisions. So if you're a manager and you want to find out whether a particular decision that you want to make is ethical or not, you can use these various ways to test that. All right. So point one, transparency. To what extent does the communication of such decisions make the decision makers happy? All right. So if I was to, whatever decision that I was going to make, to what extent would that, if I was to communicate that decision to those that will be affected by it, to what extent will they be happy about that decision? All right. So if they will not be happy about the decision that I'm going to make, what it means is that the tendency is for you to keep it away from them, not to be transparent. Once you cannot be transparent, what it means is that there is a higher chance that the decision you want to make will be unethical. All right. If you are not afraid to disclose to the people who will be affected by the decision, what the decision that you want to make, then chances are that the decision is likely to be ethical. 2, effect. To what extent did the decision maker consider the ill effects of decisions while finalizing the same? So if you took your time to understand the effect of that decision, how the decision is likely to impact on people, it is very, very likely that you make an ethical decision. All right. But if you didn't bother, you didn't do those analysis, like the galamsey illegal mining going on, affecting even unborn babies. Okay. And yet people have not sat down to look at the effect of these decisions, this desire for money and how it is affecting humanity. Then the chances are that you'll be making an unethical decision. But if they were to sit down and follow the news and the report of how this is having an impact on the health of people, there is a higher chance that they are likely to make ethical decisions by stopping the illegal mining activities. Okay, then you can also use the test of fairness. To what extent can the decision be considered fair by all cross sections of people in the organization? Once people will see the decision to be fair, then you can be assured that you are likely, you probably took a very ethical decision. So yes, so we have these 3 things to guide us as managers. Transparency. Once you are afraid of your own decision, you want to hide something, then chances are that the decision is not ethical. The effect, the chances of you making ethical decision is higher when you've taken your time and pause, reflected to find out the effect of your decision on others. It has the greater chance of helping you make ethical decision. Then if in the eyes of all reasonable human beings, the decision can be considered to be fair, then chances are that you will have taken a very ethical decision. Okay. Steps in ethical decision making. The process of ethical decision making requires the following steps. Point 1, understand the potentiality of the groups affected by the decision, right? So you need to understand the group that will be affected by your decision. 2, understand the relevant issues and practices and their impact on the decision. What are the relevant issues and practices and their impact on the decision that you want to make? Ensure decisions are not vitiated by personal bias and prejudices. Okay, so the decisions that you are about to make sure they were not influenced by your personal biases and prejudices. 4, ensure decisions are finalized considering various alternatives. We said one way to be sure you're making ethical decision is when you've taken time to reflect on the effects of that particular decision. All right, so you should have considered alternatives. Were there alternative decisions or options available? 6, address all the shortcomings of the decision, including the long-term risks involved. 7, choose the decisions in compliance with existing principles, values, and standards. 8, ensure that the decision makers take responsibility for decisional outcomes. This is important because once you know you'll also be held liable for the outcomes, then it may help you to reflect and make more ethical decisions than when you will not be responsible for the outcomes. 9, ensure that the decisions are evaluated and necessary changes are made in the ethical standards of the organization. Okay. So that is that for our lecture on social, CSR, and ethics. Okay, and I just want to emphasize once again that the reason for the existence of the business of a business is not solely to make profit. At the end of the day, the business started with a vision, and the vision was about solving a particular need of society. All right. You can't start with the motive of solving the needs of society and end with the destruction of human beings or society. So in our bid and our quest to remain profitable, it is also important that we operate with the two concepts of CSR and ethics in mind. Thank you for your attention.